So, hello everybody. It's now officially 2 o'clock here, my time, based in Copenhagen. A very warm welcome to this webinar on Can Life Cycle Analyze Help Us Move Toward Net Zero Emissions in Healthcare? A very warm welcome to everybody that has signed in. My name is Jannik Jensen, and I will try to be the moderator of this very, very exciting webinar. Today, we will address how life cycle analysis can help us towards the net zero emissions in healthcare. Why do we focus on healthcare? What is that about? 5% of the CO2 emissions comes from healthcare. We need to deal with it, and we need to deal with it urgently, because this is actually something that is making the world a better place, and we become sick of this. So it's like that this will increase if we don't do anything about it. We focus here on plastic, and this is what we're here about. We have a solution where we can reduce plastic in healthcare. And I'm extremely excited about having these two very, very competent people with me in this webinar, Per and Henrik. A little bit of the technology that we sit here with. We have a chat, and you can feel free to join the chat, write any questions that you would feel like. We will answer them later. We have a Q&A session. This webinar is scheduled to be 30 minutes. So we will come to the Q&A session later, but feel free, please, to use the chat, write anything, your name, where you're placed, anything like that. And then we will come, as I said, later to the Q&A session. As I said, my name is Jannik Jensen. I will try to be the moderator of this. I have worked in healthcare myself for the last 15 years, the last 2 years addressing the environmental and climate challenge that we have, both in here, the Nordic region, but also on a global level. As I said, with me, I have two very, very special guests that can guide us through why is this important and what can we do about it. First speaker, I would like to introduce Per Lindman. Per Lindman is a life cycle analyst expert from the company Miljøgiraf AB. He has performed more than 500 life cycle analysis since 2009 on many different products, aligning trustworthy and effective climate strategies for various companies. A warm welcome to you, Per, and a real pleasure to have you here with us. Please enlighten us on how life cycle analysts can help us in the future.
Thank you very much for that, Jannik. Thank you. I will try my best to do this. And thank you for the opportunity also to talk today. This is one of my favorite topics, of course, to talk about life cycle assessment and life cycle perspective and the importance of it. But first of all, so as Jannik said, I come from a company called Miljøgiraf, which is a specialized environmental consultancy firm on LCAs. And we've been doing this in 2003, so it's 20 years now. And I've been part of this since 2009. And it's quite interesting because, like I said, I've been part of this in 2009, but it's just in the recent years that we can really see an increase of the demand of the life cycle perspective and thereof. And I'm just going to show you one example of this. So let's get to change the slide here. So this was Miljøgiraf until from 2003 to 2019. And since 2019 to 2022, or this year, we have so many people more. So this just says a little bit about the demand that we can see in society today about, and also the awareness of the necessity of the life cycle perspective. But then let's go to the real case here and talk a little bit about the basics. So what is a life cycle assessment? So a life cycle assessment is a way of quantifying the environmental burden of a product, service, organization from the whole life cycle. And that will include the raw material, the production, the transportation, the usage, and the end of life of a product, or like I said, a service or your organization. And the whole idea about this is that by quantifying it, we can understand where the environmental burden occurs in the life cycle, and then in an efficient manner, we can take measures for mitigating this environmental burden. When we don't understand where the environmental burden comes from, when we don't have the total picture, it makes it very hard for us to make efficient changes. And like Jannik says, this is something very urgent now, we're starting to understand even more. So this is one of the first and most important parts of having an efficient environmental strategy. And this we understood for a long time. Already in the 1990s, it was developed a standard for how to do this, because this is quite a complex task to understand the whole life cycle. And because if we only look from a perspective of a consumer or a producer, we usually then loses around 90% of the environmental burden. So like I said, we started up a standard for this already in the 1990s, and it's still there. And it's called the ISO 14040 series that defines how we do this in a transparent, reliable, and scientific way. And that's a very important part to have, because one of the really important things for doing to understand LCA and also have reliable results is that we understand how we have done it. And then following these standards is one of the main key important things to do. And that gives us, by many things, that all the life cycles should be included in almost every case. There can be reasons for withdrawing life cycle phases sometimes, but it's so important that if we have relevant phases, then it should be included in this overall and total compilation and quantification of the environmental burden. So that is one of and I tried here in this slide to show you 3 different parts that I think is the most important when you're doing good LCAs. And that means not even when you do LCAs, but also when you're trying to read LCA reports and use them as a result for understanding environmental burden of product or services. So I think it's 3 parts that are the most important to look for. And one of them is the first thing I said, is by looking at the standard. We need to follow this standard. This standard is done so we can do transparent, robust, and reliable LCAs. And there's no reason not to follow in this standard. So if you find an LCA report and it says we don't follow the standard, we're just doing a little bit like we feel like it was the best way of doing it, then you should be very cautious when you read it and you're trying to understand the results. So that's one of the key things. The other things is that we use good data when we're building up a model for these LCAs. This is called LCI data because it stands for life cycle inventory, meaning that every data that we put in a model have the life cycle perspective. So all parts of a life cycle have all life cycle perspective into them. And then that means that these data also must be of good quality, because we have bad data in, then the result's not going to be reliable. It's going to be bad results out. And there are quite a few very good LCI data libraries around. One of the biggest ones is the one I have an example here, but there are several more. That is called EcoInvent. And the main thing with that one is that it has good documentation of the LCI data, and it's also third-party reviewed, meaning that it's not something you can understand where the data comes from, and it's also third-party reviewed, which makes them more reliable. And then we have the third step or third key ingredient for a good LCA that you should, when you do an LCA or when you look up a LCA, is important to look at. And that is that when you have built up a model of the LCA, then you also have well-known impact assessment methods for quantifying the environmental burden in the end. One of the most famous of these ones we have is the IPCC 2021 for quantifying climate change potential. That is a very well-known, it's very scientific, and it has good documentation on how it's compiled and where it comes from. And that gives a good, reliable results in the end. So these 3 parts is what I see as the most important that you look for when you see an LCA or when you're doing an LCA. Following the standard, good data, transparent documentation about the data, and that you have good environmental impact assessment methods in the end, where you compile everything. Yes, and when we have this then, so what we do with all this is that we then quantifying environmental burden through the whole life cycle. And that's all life cycle assessment actually does. It says, okay, this is big and small from an environmental perspective. This is important, this is not important when we look at this product or service or whatever it is. And what we can do then is by understanding by this quantification, we can see, okay, in which part of the life cycle do we have this highest environmental burden? And then we can start deriving the results from there So as you can see, this is just for some examples. For example, you can see to the left here, we have a diagram where you can see the total environmental burden of a product. And then we can see how that is divided on the different life cycle stages. And then, as we can see here, okay, raw material have the highest environmental burden. Then we can actually go down into the raw material and then see, okay, there was this specific raw material that gave rise to this high environmental burden. And then we have a very good basis for an efficient measure to mitigate this. We can see, okay, can we change this material? Can we use less of that material? Can we have recycled material instead? And so on and so forth then. But the important thing is here that we also have this whole picture. We have no reason for just giving a result that says, okay, this has 42 kilograms of CO2 as a result. That doesn't give us very much. That doesn't give us tools to continue our work and to enhance the product or the service. So that's why it's so important that we also can go down and derive the results and understand it a little more deeper. And that you can do when you're using the standard in the right way, you're doing good LCI data, and you compile it with an LCA software and impact assessment methods that can handle this kind of data. So from this, we can get different types of results. Like I said, we can identify relevant aspects all over the life cycle. We can go down and say, okay, which materials is it? Is it the transportation? Is it the electricity used in manufacturing? Or is it the end of life of the product and so forth? So we can really pinpoint what environmental aspects are the most relevant for this product. And then we can also use this to try different scenarios using this LCA tool. So we can see, okay, the aluminium stands for 60% for this product. What happens if we change that to steel instead? What happens if we change it to recycle aluminium and so forth? So by having this model that we build up, we can also then see what happens if we change these materials. What happens then? So it gives the LCA tool also gives the opportunity for different scenarios and see what would be efficient ways of mitigating the environmental results for this product then. That's also one very important part of it. And the other thing that's very important to say, and is that when we look at LCAs, we don't only look at climate change potential. It's easy nowadays because we talk so much about climate change potential and CO2 that we think that this is the only environmental problem that we have in the world today, but that's unfortunately not the case. We have a couple of other very important matters to understand also the environmental burden of a product. And the LCA usually look at around 18 to 20 different perspectives of understanding the total environmental burden. And that's important to say as well. So we don't only look at climate change, because sometimes doing what we can to lower or minimizing the climate change can actually make it worse for some other environmental effect categories. And then when we look at the whole picture, we do counterproductive measures, and that we want to avoid. So that's also important to state. And what can we use it for then? So one of the things the LCA does, it gives us three main values. It's communication, product development, and strategy. And when we look at communication, it says that if we are communicating externally about environmental performance from a product or service, we need to have a life cycle assessment in the background. So it needs to be done according to ISO 14040. That is not always, as we can see, society is not always compliant with that. And we see a lot of different people saying stuff about their environmental performance, like we have a green product, or we have a sustainable product, and all these vague ways of communicating environmental performance. That is one, for not allowed, and also doesn't give a good of confidence concerning the environmental burden. And instead, by using the LCA and this exact quantification, we can be much more precise in the communication, and we can also then follow the legislation about how you are allowed to communicate about environmental performance. So it's a prerequisite for communicating external results, and then it's also a good basis then for understanding environmental performance for a company that's going to buy a product or a procurer or whatever it is. Then this gives a very good understanding about the product's environmental performance. And what it also does, by showing this and understanding where the different where the environmental performance is occurring, it also gives the awareness of the issues and opportunities. We can start optimizing the usage of the product by understanding where the environmental burden occurs in the life cycle. So if we can see from a product, okay, the end of life where we burn up the product has a lot of environmental burden when we compare the different life cycle stages, then we can understand, okay, what can we do? Can we recycle this one? Can we have a circular solution for this product, and so on and so forth, by them getting aware for the company that is buying this product, and then can optimize the way of using it. The LCA can also be used for sustainability reporting. That is something that is really present matter with the legislation of CSRD coming up, very much so. And there the life cycle perspective is mentioned, and it's even mandatory when it comes to the quantification and the communication into CSRD. When we, for instance, talk about scope 3 for different organizations and understanding that, it's mandatory that you use the life cycle perspective and you do it in a way that it's compliant with ISO 14040. So this is something that's really is coming now, and the understanding about the life cycle perspective is really booming in society, and it will not be less. And one of the reasons for this is the CSRD is really going to put the pressure of the life cycle perspective on all bigger companies the coming years now. And then we also have the product development. By understanding how the environmental burden occurs and what materials, what parts it is, we can be optimizing our product by changing designs, and we can change materials to minimize the environmental burden as much as we can. It's also very good when we go to strategy. It's also a very good basis for understanding, okay, what will be our, by extrapolating these results for how much we are selling or what we are producing, we can understand our big climate change potential for a whole organization, and then we can build up strategies from this one to see, okay, this is what we are today. What can we do for changing and minimizing this? So it's very good for creating guidelines and sustainability strategy as well. And it's also important to say the last one there, because where it says identify new business opportunities. So it's also a way of finding new ways of, in a more conscious society that we have, and more conscious procurers and buyers of products, the more you can understand your environmental burden, and you can compare it to the other things on the market. It gives a good opportunity for new business opportunities by communicating this in a smart way, and also showing this then in a very transparent and correct, robust way. So that was that, and then I want to show you this one as well, because I think this is also one very important slide to show, especially for producing companies, that shows that we do in life cycle assessment, not just to understand, okay, this is 42 kilograms of CO2 for our product, but it's used as a tool for creating smart and good strategies to mitigating this. The results from a life cycle assessment need to be used for it to have a real impact on the sustainability of our whole society. So it's important to see this as a process where we go from understanding the life cycle, understanding the environmental burden of our product, and then we're doing changes, doing things smarter, and then once again we try to calculate it, and that gives us a developing and a continual development, and also a continual enhancement of the product, and then in the end the sustainability of this society as a whole. So that was the main points I wanted to do today. We didn't have so much time, but I want you to take with you to understand what is important to look at when we see an LCA report, to see that following the standards, it's good data, it's transparent, and it's done with the correct impact assessment methods. And that you see this as a process for continuing developing the environmental burden and enhancing your product or your procurement as a company.
Thank you so much, Per, for that excellent presentation. I
Thank
see
you.
that we already have questions in the Q&A session for you, tough ones. I think we will come back to that later in the Q&A session. Thank you for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Now we will talk a little bit about how a new LCA comparing fossil plastic waste containers, recycled clinical plastic containers, and biocomposite clinical waste containers can help and support this thing about driving down the emissions of CO2. As I said in the beginning, we have a huge problem with plastic in our healthcare sector. And one of the products that can come in here and support this and replace plastic is actually a product that Henrik will talk about. Let me lead you a formal presentation of Henrik. Henrik Adolfsson is responsible to develop a sustainable solutions for the healthcare at Frost Pharma AB. Experience from developing dosing acids in bioplastics and now the risk waste containers, the first one in the world based on biocomposite material. A very warm welcome to you, Henrik.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Per. Excellent. And also feels good to have a very robust LCA to lean on when we are introducing a totally new material. So what you see on the screen here, we have actually developed risk waste containers in a totally new material. So biocomposite has been developed together with Stora Enso and also Mälarplast in Eskilstuna. So all the raw material and all the production is in Sweden. And end of the day, based on the facts that Per introduced, we reduced the CO2 by 66%. So we now have all the bins, they're all certified according to all the needed ADR UN certificates needed. And we're actually launching it as we speak. So those are all the sizes you see on the screen. So why have we developed this product? The reason is that today there are over 10 million of these bins. It goes into incineration, are combusted every year in the Nordics, 10 million. So it's actually the third biggest source of plastic in the healthcare. And it's highly relevant today when we see the climate results and the meetings going on as we speak. There is a need to do something. And this is one of the biggest polluters when it comes to CO2. So the potentials of changing from today's fossil-based plastic to biocomposite is 39,000 tons per year only in the Nordics. So that's the marketplace we are in. And also we should focus on the low-hanging fruit. Where can we do the most for the climate? If we conclude the gloves and aprons and the waste bins, they stand for 72% of all single-use plastic in healthcare. And as Yannick mentioned, healthcare is a big polluter, around 5 to 6% globally. So we can do a big difference. So by changing the bins, by recycling the aprons, and by reducing and recycling the gloves, the potential in existing solutions is cutting the CO2 by 50%. Those solutions are available. So why biocomposite from Sweden? Today, all the bins are based on fossil-based polymers, plastic, and they all go into combustion, or they are incinerated. Over 80% of the raw material in the biocomposites is a renewable material. So most of the material is sawdust, actually residual waste, and also a mix of bio-based polymers from pine oil. And it's also a huge advantage to have it produced in Sweden. We have the greenest energy mix in Europe with all the solar, water power, nuclear power. So this is a renewable material that is sustainable in the long run. And of course, we made a full LCA comparing the existing bins. And this follow the rules that Per mentioned before. It's according to IPCC's and the ISO regulations or recommendations how to do the LCA. And it's quite interesting to see how you can use a detailed LCA to improve your product and also compare it to add new materials to upgrade the product. But by comparing 1 kilo per kilo, you would think that recycled plastic is a good material for waste bins. But actually, if you look at an LCA, you will see that the pollution or the CO2 footprint is as big as virgin plastic. So comparing virgin to recycled plastic is actually just a reduction overall by 10–11%. But if you would change to biocomposite and WoodSafe, you would reduce it by 66%. So 2/3 of the CO2 by changing from a yellow bin to a brown bin. And it's interesting what Per also mentioned, when you split it up, if you see on the right side of the screen, we have split it up into 4 parts. The extraction of the raw material and the production and the transport and the incineration. Here you can see where we can improve and also where it makes a big difference. We just had last week, we had a request from a new customer in Australia. And you wonder, does it make sense to produce a bin in Sweden and ship it to Australia? But after Per put it into the model and put it on a boat from Gothenburg all the way to Sydney, the CO2 reduction is still 61.3%. So in this case, we could actually start to develop it. So now the global market is open for a product like WoodSafe if the transport makes sense. So you can use this model to both improve the product, but you can also evaluate where it makes sense to be shipped or transported. So as you can see on the right screen here also that we improve on all stages. You can also calculate how much the CO2 footprint is in the product. So if you go to woodsafe.green, you will find a CO2 calculator, and you can add the volumes of bins that you use today, and you will directly get a result how much CO2 you would save per year. So in this case, you can see it's all 36 tons per year. And I think this is Danderyds Hospital actually. And this follow the standards as Per mentioned, and this could also be fed into the CSRD reporting, which is a new regulations from January 24. So WoodSafe is probably the easiest climate action in the world and is backed up by a full LCA. The LCA you can also download from woodsafe.green. You have a summary, which is maybe easier to read in 3 pages, and you also have the full LCA up to 70 pages long. They are all open to be viewed from the homepage. So thank you very much for joining this webinar, and I hope you got some good background and understanding of the LCA and how it could be used. And I hope you also find WoodSafe as a good alternative to fossil-based plastic in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely presentation, Henrik. Wonderful to listen to. Can I now we'll go to the Q&A session, and for those of you who signed in, we did say 30-minute webinar. Sorry that we have used all the time before the Q&A session. If you need to go, please go. But let's take some of the questions, and thank you for all the questions that you wrote in the Q&A session. One of the tough questions, and I think I will address this to you, Per. Let's start with that. Is there an easy way to understand and implement the result from an LCA into sustainability reporting according to coming CSRD/ERS regulations, or is it highly individual? Did you get the question?
I got the question. I wouldn't say it's highly individual. Like they are referring to the ESRS says, if you're going to put some results in your sustainability reporting according to, it needs to be done according to the rules that ESRS are defining. And these are harmonized with ISO 14040, and they're also based on, you can say they're harmonized together, which means that if you're done the LCA or the LCA, you want to say that, okay, we buy this product, you can actually add it in. But you need to be a little bit just so you don't add too much of a life cycle into your product, so to say, if you're a supplier and so on. But otherwise, if it's done according to the ESRS and you can see that it's done according to the ISO standard, then I would say that you are able to use it straight away into your sustainability reporting.
Thank you for that, Per. Also, another question from one of our attendees. Can you offer WoodSafe outside the Nordics? What customers do you have today? I would address this to you, Henrik. What do you say?
Yes, we can offer it globally. The certificates and the approvals are international. And we're actually today offering to the UK, to the Benelux, and to the rest of Europe, and also, as I mentioned, even to Australia. So coming back from Medica in Düsseldorf, we came home with over 50 countries that were interested to get started with WoodSafe. So it's a huge interest globally, since the climate issue is global, of course. So yes, we can offer it with international labels, etc., on a global market today.
Thank you, Henrik. If anyone is interested, how do they get in touch with us?
Yeah, please view. The easiest way is go to woodsafe.green. There you have all the contact information. You will have information about the products, the LCA, the calculator, etc., etc. So that's the best. woodsafe.green. There you will find all the email addresses as well.
Thank you. Another question is, I think I will put this to you, Per. LCA in the future of healthcare. Where do you see this moving forward?
That's a good question. To start with, I mean, it must be part of the procurement of the healthcare system, of course. I would say that it's not as it should be mandatory, but it's not today. And the knowledge about the life cycle perspective and understanding and the importance of understanding the whole life cycle and not just what you see as a consumer in a hospital or in a healthcare institution should really be enhanced. And I think actually it will be as the increasing demand of this type of result is coming in, and it's also getting more and more it's more and more of like when the procurement institutions like in Sweden are getting more aware of this and putting the demands on, and then it goes to the private companies as well. And as long as some companies can do this in a good way and they get benefit from it, I think it will snowball, and all other types of products need to do it as well. So I really hope the demands from the procurement and the knowledge of the healthcare institutions and the procurement is enhancing by or getting these LCAs more. I would say that's the lowest hanging fruit, because there will be a lot of information out there that they can use, and there already is a lot of information they can use. So I think that's the most important, I would say.
Thank you for that, Per. Last question before we wrap up. We're already a little bit over time, and as I said before, excuse us for that. We're competing against one of the cheapest ingredients of all, plastic. So a great question here from one of our listeners: how about pricing compared to regular price plastic bins? I think I will address this to you, Henrik. What's the answer on that one?
Yeah, this is a totally new material, but it's still a very cheap way of reaching your climate goals. So the alternative cost to have the same CO2 reduction with an alternative activity will be much higher. So this is still a cheap way to reach your climate goals.
Thank you for that. I still see some questions coming in, and as I said, we're over time. What we will do is, of course, we have recorded this webinar, and we will attach the answers to this Q&A session to the recording, and we will send this out to everyone. On behalf of both Per and Henrik and myself, thank you all for attending this webinar. It has been great to have you all listening in here. I hope that you all found it interesting to listen into what we can do with plastic. And here is, of course, a product that is ready ready to roll out one-to-one compared to what you have today. It's another product. It's made in biocomposite. So great to have you here, Per. Thank you for coming in. Thank you, Henrik, and thank you for all the listeners to join in. I wish you, on behalf of everybody here, a wonderful afternoon and a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.